may start.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for having me back. I really enjoy speaking to this group. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm glad to hear that there are some repeat customers. So my name is Christine Hartford. I am a pediatrician with NYIT College of Osteopathic Medicine in Jonesboro. And today I'm going to talk about a variety of topics, but I do think they all sort of fall under this category of healthy habits, healthy lifestyle, and just healthy living. We are going to talk about a little bit first just about routines in general and why they are so important for our children. And then we'll spend a bit of time talking about sleep and bedtime routines, because that is even more crucial to, I think, good quality of life for both our children and parents. And then we'll switch gears and talk about more emotional and mental health topics like stress, depression, and coping. And then finally, at the end, spend some time focusing on parents and what we can do and maybe some resources to help us when we're feeling overwhelmed. So first, just a few words about routines. Routines are helpful, as you probably know, at all points throughout the day and for children of all ages. So if you think about it, we have our morning routine where we wake up pretty much at the same time every day, have breakfast, get dressed, get our things ready for the day, and drop off, whether that's a daycare or school for a lot of children. The daytime for the children, again, whether they're at daytime or at school, is very routine, very regimented, pretty much the same thing every day. Then we have our after school routines, which for some kids might involve an extracurricular activity or a sport, but it's usually then coming home, having some downtime, maybe some homework time, depending on the age of the children. Then we have dinner time, which that can be a really nice routine to do together as a family when everyone comes together at the end of the day. When we can manage it, it can get difficult with everyone's schedules, work schedules, and then as our children get older, all their schedules. But if we can a couple times a week come together as a family, turn off the TV, turn off distractions, focus on each other, and just talk, that is a really healthy habit for us to get into. And then at the end of the day, we have our bedtime routines, which we'll talk about. But having these routines for kids of all ages is helpful because that predictability is comforting for children. They find security in that. Knowing what to expect next and what is expected of them can be very helpful with behaviors and with children learning self-regulation. And it can just be very calming and reassuring, especially for those kids who tend to be a little bit more on the anxious side. And so having these schedules, having routines where children know what's coming next can really help with those transitions from one time of the day or one activity to the next. And letting kids know ahead of time when there might be changes in their routines or changes in their schedule so that they can anticipate that also can be very helpful. But focusing a little bit, we're going to switch gears and talk about bedtime routines, but I wanted to say a few words just about sleep in general. And I think we can all sort of identify with this from personal experience, but sleep is crucial. Sleep is very important. And for our children, it really does affect their overall health and well-being. And one thing I want to point out is that good sleep habits really do start from birth. Once we get past those first few weeks, having even our babies on a regular sleep, wake, feeding schedule and sort of getting into those habits and those routines right from the beginning can be very helpful, especially if we're consistent, and it can sort of set the kids up for easier bedtimes and healthier sleep habits in the next stages. So how much sleep do our kids need? That's a common question. So I thought it would be helpful to put this up here. And you can see it changes. It depends on age. So as we get older, we need a little bit less sleep. And there's a range. So when we look at these numbers, there's a range that's recommended for sort of each age group. So there is some variability, and each child will fall somewhere different within that range, but you'll sort of get to know your own children and where they sort of fall on this spectrum. And so when we look at our infants, they need about 12 to 16 hours of sleep. And I should point out that this does include naps. So these totals are within a 24-hour period, the total amount of sleep children should be getting. So for our infants, it's 12 to 16 hours. For our toddlers, 1 to 2 years of age, it's 11 to 14 hours. For preschoolers, 3 to 5 years of age, it's 10 to 13 hours. For our grade schoolers, it's 9 to 12 hours. And for our teens, it's 13 For our teens, sorry, it's 8 to 10 hours. So just kind of take note of that and think whether or not your children are getting the recommended amount of sleep. I think it can be challenging for the older kids, especially. I think there's lots of adolescents that are not getting the recommended amount of sleep. And when we say, this is recommended, as it says on the slide, this is the hours of sleep that we think that children need to do what they're supposed to be doing, which is to grow and learn and play to the best of their ability and to get the best enjoyment out of that. So I think we all know how we feel when we don't get enough sleep, and life is harder, right? We just don't get enough as much enjoyment out of things. We don't function as well. And so for our kids, I think one of the most important things that we can do as their parents is to really make sure that they get enough sleep. And again, I think many of us know this from personal experience, but there are a lot of effects on ourselves from when we're sleep deprived. This can be anything from irritability, which then in the children can lead to behavior problems and acting out, whether both at home and at school. It's harder to concentrate when we're sleep deprived, and this can lead to just trouble paying attention at school, or maybe even falling asleep at school, which then affects learning and overall school performance. And then there's even physical symptoms that we can feel when we're sleep deprived, and that includes headaches and then feelings of depression. And these are just a few. There have been some studies that have shown a correlation between poor sleep and things like hypertension and obesity. And on the flip side of that, though, children who do get adequate amounts of regular sleep have improvements in their overall school performance, in behaviors, in memory, and even in their mental health. So sleep definitely is incredibly important. So we're going to talk about bedtime and some sleeping tips for sort of children that fall into those different age categories. For our infants, as I mentioned already, we can really get the infants onto a regular sleep schedule. It's something we should be working towards fairly early, and then sticking to that regular schedule of feeding time, nap time, and bedtime. Of course, infants will need to wake overnight to be fed, to be changed. And that's fine. When we do that, though, we should really try to avoid overstimulating the baby too much, avoid trying to engage with them too much or wake them too much. Really just do what you need to do. Feed the baby, change the baby, and put the baby back down. On the flip side, though, during the day, try to engage the baby as much as possible. Make those wake times as stimulating and as engaging as possible. That might help sort of stretch out those wake times during the day, and then in turn help the infants and babies sleep a little bit better at night. One thing that's important to get in the habit that can be very helpful is when you put the baby down in the crib or the bassinet, put them down when they're drowsy but still awake. And that might be a phrase you've heard before. This is important for a couple of reasons. The baby then, if they're still slightly awake when they go down into the crib, they learn to self-soothe themselves to sleep. They learn that they don't have to be completely asleep to be in their crib or their bassinet, so that at night, when they do wake, we all wake several times during the night. So if the baby wakes, not needing to be fed, not needing to be changed, just sort of wakes a little bit at night, they will be more apt to have the ability to soothe themselves and just fall back asleep without having to cry out for a parent. But when the baby does fuss at night and you do need to attend to the baby, that's fine. But you just know that you don't have to go right away. Giving the baby a chance to self-soothe, to settle down, may work perfectly fine. So I would encourage you to try that with the little ones. For our toddlers, this I think can be more challenging. And this is where it can be really helpful to sort of get into that bedtime routine practice, where you have a routine at the end of the day that just starts to help the child sort of wind down and quiet down and realize that, okay, now it's bedtime. This is what is expected of me now. It's important to be very consistent. So that the child knows what's expected of them each day. As far as the bed, it's fine to have the child bring something to bed with them. Not lots of toys, not a bed full of stuffed animals, but to have that one favorite thing in bed with them, that sort of transitional object, whether it's a blanket, a teddy bear, a doll, just to check to make sure that there's no choking hazards or anything. But that actually can be very comforting for the toddler when they have that comforting object with them. When they sort of wake in the middle of the night, those things, those comforting objects can actually maybe help them sort of settle back down and go back to sleep. Before the child gets into bed, of course, make sure the room is comfortable temperature, that they have their, favorite pillow or whatnot, and then take care of all their needs before they actually get into bed. So drink of water, potty, kissing daddy goodnight, kissing sister goodnight, kissing dog tonight, goodnight, whatever. Get all of those things out of the way before the child actually gets into the bed. It's really recommended that the child not sleep in bed with parents. For infants, this is actually a hazard. There's co-sleeping increases the risk for sudden unexplained infant deaths. But even more outside of that risk period, when a child sleeps in bed with parents, they will sort of get used to having somebody there with them, and they may really think that they have to be with somebody to fall asleep, and they won't have that ability to fall asleep by themselves. And I also think that when there's a lot of co-sleeping going on, I think it impacts the quality of sleep for the children and the parents alike. And then when children of this age call out in the middle of the night or start to fuss in the middle of the night, same as with the infants, we don't need to be rushing in the room right away. We don't need to go every time. Give them a chance to try to settle down and realize that they can do that on their own. One bedtime routine that you probably have heard of, and that is popular and can work very well, is the 4 Bs, which is the bath, brush, book, and bed. So that, starting with that bath, that's a nice definitive activity that the child can identify with, that sort of separates daytime to, okay, now it's that transition to bedtime. And the bath also is, for many children, enjoyable and quite soothing, and can sort of help them start to wind down. Next is brush, which we could talk a lot about dental health and oral health, but we should really be brushing or wiping the children's teeth as soon as we see them appear. So adding that brushing, not only is it a good health practice, but it sort of teaching the child the importance of doing that, and it's just sort of necessary. So it fits well to put it with this bedtime routine, so that really the last thing touching the children's teeth at night, except for maybe some water, is the toothbrush. Next is book, which again, we could spend a lot of time talking about the benefit of books for our children. There are so many, but in this context of the bedtime routine, it's a great way to bond with children, to sort of snuggle up in bed and read that book with them, and just have that bonding time. Books are great, though, for also improving their literacy skills, their language skills, and their overall neurodevelopment. And with the books, you can read the book. That's perfectly fine, but just know that you can be creative with it too. You can just tell stories based on the pictures. You could point to things and have the child name them. You could ask the child questions. You could ask them to tell you a story based on what they're seeing in the book. So there's lots of different things you could do with that book that are really not just enjoyable, but beneficial to the child as well. And then, of course, at the end is our bedtime. And ideally, you would leave the child in bed. They would still be awake, falling asleep on their own and falling asleep independently. So this is a very common approach to that bedtime routine. But there's lots of different ways you could do it, and finding what is enjoyable for your child and what works for your family is important. Just a few words about the big kid bed, the big boy bed, the big girl bed. I think this can definitely be a challenging time, and it can take some time for the child to get used to that. I would encourage you to sort of stick with the same bedtime routine that your child is used to. It's just that now they're sleeping in a bed instead of the crib. Once you get to the end of your bedtime routine, tell the child that they need to stay in bed until you come for them in the morning. When and if and when, because usually they will get out of bed at some point, at least at the beginning. The best way to approach that is to just be quiet, calm, and businesslike about it, even though it can get incredibly frustrating. Just quietly lead the child back into bed, put them in bed, reinforce that it's a good thing that they're back in the bed, and then leave. Sometimes telling the child that you will check on them during the night, that can be helpful. They can find comfort in that. And you might have to repeat these steps over and over and over again for a while, but doing it in this way and not really engaging with the child too much, not making it fun, not making it playtime, just all business back to bed, they won't get any positive reinforcement from it. It will become boring to them. They will realize, okay, nothing much is going to happen except I'm going to get put right back to bed. I'm not going to get playtime. I'm not going to get an extra book. I'm not going to get an extra story. And then eventually, over time, they will sort of give up on that. The other thing to think about at this point that I didn't put on the slide, but this is a great, an important time to sort of relook at the room and the space for childproofing. So if your child is still in that sort of habit of getting out of bed, sometimes we need to put, railings or gates up on the, if there's a staircase nearby, or just making sure windows are closed and things like that. So making sure that it's a safe space. And then once we get to the school age children, this is where we can allow more flexibility. Children are more independent. They may not want you or need you to bathe them anymore. They might prefer a shower rather than a bath. They might, have different books they want to read, and that's fine. Giving choices is perfectly fine, but there also needs to be a limit in those choices. And the key here is just not to let that bedtime routine get too drawn out. Ideally, it should be less than 30 minutes. And then on the weekends, again, more flexibility is okay, but it really is recommended to try to keep the child's wake time within about an hour of what their body is normally used to, and keeping them on that regular schedule really can be helpful. That can be difficult, but just sort of keep that in mind. And then a few words about the sleep environment in general for all of us. And this sort of falls into that category of what we call sleep hygiene. And these are, along with the bedtime routine, these are measures that we review with anybody who's having trouble sleeping, because sometimes simple things that we can change in our sleep environment can actually make a big difference in terms of a better night's sleep. So of course it should be comfortable, not too hot, not too cold. Really important to remove distractions. And this can be challenging, but no TV, no computers, no tablets, no video game systems. Ideally, none of that should be in the bedroom. That's a distraction, right? So if you have a child who's having trouble falling asleep, if their phone's right there, they're going to be really tempted to get on that phone. Or if they wake up in the middle of the night, same thing. And not only does that prevent, it's a distraction, but the blue light that comes from all of our electronic devices actually interferes with melatonin, which is the substance released in our brain that actually stimulates us to fall asleep. So that's why it's recommended that there's no media for at least 1 hour before bedtime. The other thing is that the bed should be for sleep. It shouldn't be for playtime. It shouldn't be filled with toys. It shouldn't be for homework. Our body should really recognize the bed as the place that we sleep, and that can help with falling asleep. And then soothing sounds can be helpful. Not all kids, but some really enjoy this. For my oldest son, we just sort of by chance started playing this CD with lullabies when he was an infant. And we ended up playing that CD every night for years. And I really think that his body, like when he heard that music, he identified that with sleep. And I really do think it helped fall asleep. So, for some children, that can also be very helpful. Okay, so we're going to change gears now from sleep and routines and move on and talk about our emotional health and mental health, and talk about things like stress, depression, and coping. And some of the slides I have in this section were originally from a talk that I did that was specific to the pandemic, and just how that's affecting parenting and how that's affecting our children. And I decided to keep them here because for a couple of reasons. I think that the emotional impacts that the pandemic has had on a lot of us are still impacting us and will have an effect for a while. And I also think that hopefully, things are getting better, and I hope and pray that we continue on this trajectory, but I don't think that's absolutely a given at this point. So we really don't know what's going to happen in the near future. But as things sort of get back to normal, as we sort of quote unquote go through re-entry, I think that also might be stressful for some people. For some children who are used to being at home with their parents, there might be some separation anxiety. For some children who are used to being home being back in school and back around so many people might actually cause some social anxiety and other anxiety. So I just think that the impacts of the pandemic are going to be with us um, for a while. And I think we can all attest to the fact that there have been so many losses and so many stressors for both children and parents over the last year plus. Some of these are illness related. So, in our country, we've had over 600,000 people die from COVID, and many, many, many more be hospitalized or become ill. So, chances are most families know somebody who's been affected by the disease. Then there have been work and job related stresses. Many people lost their jobs when things shut down or had to take a step back because they needed to be home with their kids. School related, many children were out of school for a really long time, or they were in school and then virtual and back and forth, or doing a hybrid. And we've talked already about how important routines are for our children. And I think the last year was not a year for routines. There's a lot of unpredictability and a lot of not knowing what's coming next. And that can be really stressful. I think all of our families had individuals who missed important milestones, whether that be a graduation, a birthday that couldn't be celebrated the way we wanted to, or other things. And there's a sense of loss that goes along with that. And then also for our children, they didn't have the ability to participate in important activities, whether that's after school activities or sports, which are really important, not only for exercise, but just that sense of accomplishment and socialization. And so with that came a lot of isolation, and none of this is good for our emotional health or our mental health. And it all leads to a lot of stress, anxiety, and behavior problems. And you may have noticed these in your children or in yourself. And just a word about stress in general. There is good stress. Though that little extra push that we get that maybe motivates us to study a little harder or work a little harder, that can be good. It can help us develop resilience, or that sense of learning how to cope with difficulties and be successful and get on the other side, and realize that we do have the capacity to cope with that. But then there's the bad stress, and that is either stress that maybe one event that's so extreme, or just a sense of stress that's just very prolonged. And over time, that is very harmful to both our minds and our emotions and our bodies. And for children, it's really that every child is different. Every child's capacity to deal with stress and their temperament is different. Age and stage of development play a large role in how children cope with stress and react to various situations. So an event that might be stressful for one child of a certain age, another child might do just fine with that. So if you think about maybe changing schools, that would be very stressful for maybe a middle schooler or a high schooler, whereas a younger child might take that much more in stride. So age plays a large role. And then the other thing to remember about stress is that children notice when we're stressed. And I think we can, not much gets by our kids, right? And so they notice when we're stressed, they notice when we're worried, they pick up on that. Even little tiny ones can sense when they're being held differently. Children sense changes in tones of voice or facial expressions, and those are things that they pick up on. And so when we're more stressed and worried and anxious, our children may also be more apt to be stressed and worried and anxious. So this something we're going to talk about later. That's one reason why it's really important that as parents, we take the time to focus on ourselves as well, because it's hard to be the best parent we can be for our kids when we're not taking care of ourselves. So it's something that's really important to keep in mind. So what to look for? What are the signs that a child may be struggling? And every child is different, and nobody knows their child better than the parents, right? So we'll talk about all of these things that are listed here, but I also just, if you notice something in your child that's just off, that's different, that they're doing something that is not typical for them, pay attention to that. Don't just trust your instincts, and pay attention to that. So for our infants and younger children, you might notice that they are more easily irritable or fussier than normal, sleeping difficulties, feeding difficulties. They might have separation anxiety or be overly clingy, when they've already sort of passed that stage, sort of regressing a little bit. throwing tantrums when that's not typical for them, regression in skills. So not just being clingy, but maybe a good example is having accidents after they've already been potty trained. And then just doing attention seeking behaviors, doing things that they know probably are going to get them in trouble, but they're just striving and seeking for that attention. And then there are some physical symptoms as well. For our older children and our adolescents, you might notice a change in mood, and that could be being more irritable, being more anxious. It could be mood fluctuations, or just sort of erratic mood swings. You might notice changes in behavior, loss of interest in activities, things that they used to really enjoy doing, all of a sudden they just don't want to do anymore. Again, trouble sleeping or changes in appetite and weight are common. Trouble concentrating at home or at school, leading to just an overall disinterest in school or a drop in grades. Changes in appearance, an increase in risky, reckless, or defiant behavior. So again, just sort of these things that they know will probably getting in trouble, but it's just a way to reach out and a way to just sort of seek attention. And then, of course, in our older ones, you might actually notice that they speak words that reflect thoughts of death or suicide. And then physical symptoms. And physical symptoms, I mean, it can be really anything, but the ones that are most common tend to be things like headaches, stomach aches, just kind of general aches and pains that that can't be otherwise explained. I wanted to mention a self-esteem here. It's sort of a separate topic, but I think it's important to just sort of mention, because I think that children who already have a low self-esteem have more trouble coping. And sort of on the flip side, children who have a very healthy sense of self and self-esteem tend to be able to deal with stress a little bit better. So just some things to keep in mind that can be evidence of low self-esteem. So if you have a child who avoids tasks without really trying, this is a signal of a fear of failure, as a lot of these are, or quits easily at the first sign of frustration. They just give up and move on to something else, or go to such extremes where they start to cheat or lie when they think they're going to fail. So this all goes to this fear of failure. You might notice a decline in grades or a loss of interest in activity, some social withdrawal, mood swings, of self-critical comments, or being overly concerned about some others' opinions of them. So those are just things that to be on the lookout for. If you notice them, maybe speaking to a child who is struggling with low self-esteem. So what can we do to help our children cope? Just in stressful times or when we notice some of these overt signs that they might be struggling. It sounds simple, but talking to them is is where we need to start. Talking to them directly and openly, and just flat out asking them what's worrying them. It's really important to validate their emotions. It would be a mistake to say that what they're feeling, they shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling, or they're being overly dramatic. It's really important for them to feel like they have a right to feel whatever they feel. And so for them to feel that those emotions and feelings are being recognized and validated is important. Especially when kids are sort of anxious or stressed or worried about certain things, finding ways to help them occupy their minds can be really helpful, whether that's something is, sort of big picture is finding a new hobby to get involved with, or just giving them something to do, a chore or a job to do around the house that is just for at least a little while will take their minds off whatever it is that might be bothering them. Helping them reframe negative thoughts is also really important. So for example, in the pandemic, we already mentioned missed milestones. And so that's really like negative, right? All the things that kids missed out on over the last year, but maybe helping them, and it's really easy to focus on that, but maybe helping them see that something positive that came out of that. And for many of us, that's, we got to spend, the kids were home more, maybe they got to spend more time with their mom or dad and do things with them that they otherwise wouldn't have. So that's just an example of how you can help the child to look at a situation a little bit differently, and that might be helpful. Creating new routines. So routines we already talked about are so important. So if the normal routine gets impacted, then trying our best to create a new routine so that, again, the child falls into that sort of pattern of knowing what to expect can be helpful. So for example, maybe in a situation where parents get divorced and the child is living two different places, that can be very disruptive. But sort of best you can, getting into a new routine that so that the child knows what to expect in that situation, that can be helpful. It's important to be reassuring as you can to your child, but also be honest with them, to be available as much as possible, to be there for them when they are ready to talk, because especially for the older kids, sometimes it's hard, and to be calm. So we already talked about the fact that our kids read us very well. They know when we're stressed. So trying our best to be calm for them can be important and helpful. Some other more specific things, just teaching them ways to regulate their emotions, whether that's through relaxation techniques, breathing exercises, yoga, or just exercise in general. Exercise really can help us with our moods, and it can help us relax, and it can help us with anxiety. So even just getting the kids to go outside and run around or play with the dog or something can be helpful. For some kids, limiting media exposure is very helpful if that is a source of anxiety, which I think during the pandemic it was for a lot of people. But there's a lot of unrest that we see in the media, a lot of violence, and so for some children that can be very anxiety provoking. So if your child is sort of falls into that category, being careful with how much media they're exposed to or their access to, that can be helpful. Helping kids stay connected with others, again, helpful during the pandemic, but just important in general, especially if there's someone in your child's life who really just is that person that helps them feel good, whether it's somebody who they can talk to easily, like an aunt or a grandparent, someone they really connect with, or a friend that just notice that they really do well with. Helping them stay connected with those people is important. Of course, helping them feel loved and supported is important. And then being that positive role model for your child. So a lot of the things we just talked about, doing them yourself and modeling those behaviors for your child is important, because they learn from us. They really do learn by what they see in their parents and the example that we set for them. And then of course, take care of yourself. So we've said that several times. Not only because sort of our stress can rub off on the children, but again, because it's hard to be the best parent we can be if we're struggling. And then seeking professional help. So if you have a child who you really think is at a point where they're struggling with stress or anxiety or maybe depression, even if you're not sure, taking that step to talk to your doctor about it, and get some help for your child, whether it's just taking them to your pediatrician or getting a counselor at school or a therapist or something, can be incredibly helpful. These are the situations where I think the earlier we intervene, the better. And if despite all our best efforts, our children do escalate and we get to the point where we're concerned for something like suicide, then it's really important to trust your instincts here. Be persistent. Try to get your child to talk to you. Really try to make them open up to you. If there's a family member maybe who could help with that, who you think your child has a tendency to open up to easier, maybe get them involved. Treat any thoughts or words of suicide as a true emergency. Don't ignore them. Trust your instincts. So if you are at the point where you are concerned about suicide, don't leave your child alone. Make sure your house is safe. If your home has guns in the home, then it's always very important when you have children in the home to make sure that the guns are locked up, the ammunition is locked. They should be in separate places. But never is it more important than if we have someone in the home who's struggling with suicide or thoughts of suicide, I should say. So make sure your home is safe as possible. Guns, knives, alcohol, medication should be locked up. Make a safety plan with your child. So if you have a child who is struggling emotionally, have a plan with them. Say, okay, if you are having a really, really bad day, what are you going to do? have that person identify that they can call or reach out to at any time, that they know is going to be there for them if they're having a really bad day or are really struggling. And then, as I mentioned earlier, seeking that professional help, talking to your pediatrician, they could be a good resource for you. As soon as you notice your child is struggling, trying our best not to let things snowball and get to the point where we're concerned about suicide, obviously, is ideal. In times of crisis, there I wanted to share the suicide prevention lifeline, which you can call at any time. So the numbers listed there, and I'll have these again on the last slide. But a crisis line that you can call at any time. And also, if you have a child who is struggling with depression and is being treated, then knowing the resources in your area can be very helpful. So if your child has a therapist or psychologist, finding out, most areas have local crisis teams that can be helpful in these situations. And so sort of knowing the resource in your area, that's another, could be another good resource. So what are some risks and red flags then to be on the lookout for? Some studies have shown that children who have suicidal thoughts tend to have 3 or more of these risks going on at the same time. So a major loss in their life, struggling with substance abuse, experiencing peer or social pressures, having access to weapons, experiencing public humiliation, children who suffer from severe chronic pain or chronic medical conditions, displaying impulsive or aggressive behavior, and having a family history of suicide. So these are some some factors that have been shown in some studies to be associated with an increased risk for suicidal ideation. So I would just, I mean, it's not absolute and everybody's different, but these are just some things to sort of pay attention to. And some sort of red flag, not everybody will sort of use the words "I want to die" or "I wish I was dead," but some other phrases that can sort of be hinting at those thoughts are things like we see here: "Nothing matters. I wonder how many people would come to my funeral. Sometimes I wish I could go to sleep and never wake up. Everyone would be better off without me. You won't have to worry about me much longer." So these are phrases that if you hear them, pay attention to them. And again, like I said before, trust your instincts. You know your child better than anybody. And if this is a concern or worry for you, get help as soon as you can. Okay, so now I just wanted to focus just for a few minutes on parents. So we are just gonna talk about us for a few minutes. I think we can all attest that parenting during the pandemic has been a challenge. The last year and a half parenting is harder than ever. So this is a time that it's really important for parents to be kind to themselves, right? You don't have to be mother or father or grandparent of the year. Just cut yourself some slack and do the best you can and know that that's okay. This is the time to lower the bar. Maybe not the year to plant a garden and grow your own vegetables. Maybe this is more the year to make sure you're serving a vegetable with most meals. But it is important to set achievable goals for ourselves and then celebrate ourselves when we achieve them. I think that goes along with being kind to yourself and practicing self-care, which we've already talked about already. It's hard to be a good parent when we're not taking care of ourselves. So again, as we already talked about with our children and how important it is to validate their feelings, you need to acknowledge your own feelings as well, because I think we know, many of us can speak from experience, if you just try to ignore feelings of stress, anxiety, depression, sadness, worry, and sort of push them under the rug, that usually does not make them go away. And then staying connected to your own support system is really important as well, whether that's a family member, a friend, or a therapist, doctor, or whoever's providing you that sense of support. But we all get to a point where we sometimes feel overwhelmed, and this is when it's really, really important for us to take time for ourselves, so that we can rest, recharge, recuperate, and regain the capacity to be the parent that we want to be. And this is when it's important to really reach out to others for help, and remember that that is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. So that could be a family member or friend, maybe somebody to come over and watch your child or your children so that you can take that time for yourself. It can be your doctor if you are at the point where you think you need some professional help to see a therapist or something. And remember that your pediatrician can be a resource for you. Of course, we can't treat parents, but we want to know if you're struggling because, as we've already discussed, we know that if parents are struggling, that's going to affect children too. We care about the whole family, and so I think a lot of, depending on the ages of your children, a lot of us are face to face with our child's pediatrician way more often than we are with our own physician. So just remember that you can reach out to them, and they can be a resource for you if you're needing some help. For some people, they prefer to reach out to maybe a pastor or other religious figures, which can be very helpful for support. And then even if you're looking for professional help, lots of the professional associations, such as the American Psychological Association here, you can just go online yourself and find a therapist or a counselor if that's something you're comfortable with. And finding healthy ways to express your feelings can be helpful. For some people, that's things like maybe art, dance, music, or writing out your feelings. For some people is a good way to release sort of the negative effects that they're having on them. So those are just things to keep in mind. But sometimes, despite our best efforts to do all these things, we can get to a point where instead of letting our emotions out in healthy ways, we let them out in unhealthy ways, such as we let them out on others, whether that's verbally or physically. And if that happens, and if you feel that that's either happened to you or you are at the point where you're getting close to that, then that is really where it's time. When you feel like you are on that edge and you've reached that limit, you need to take a time out. This is the time to reach out, and really, if you're in the middle of it, really take a time out for yourself, just like we would do for the children. Make sure your child's safe. You can put a baby in a crib and just take a step back, reach out for help, and let those feelings pass. I wanted to share a couple of resources that can be helpful in those times of crisis. And again, ideally, we would be getting help before we get to that point, but I think that's a lot easier said than done. But there are some resources that can be available in these times of crisis. So they're listed here. One is the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline, which is not only a place we can call if we're concerned that a child is abused, but it's a place that we can call if we're scared that we're going to hurt somebody. They have counselors there that can actually help with that as well. The National Parent Helpline, which I'm going to show on the next slide, has a lot of really good resources. And then SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, is also very helpful. One thing that I forgot to say, just in terms of when we get to this point where we're not handling our emotions very well, sometimes we find other ways to cope. And for some people, that's things like alcohol and drugs. So if that happens, then finding help with more like those issues, such as substance abuse issues, the SAMHSA hotline or helpline can be a resource as well. The National Parent Helpline, so this is, they have a lot of good resources for parents. Their website is listed there, nationalparenthelpline.org, but then they also have the phone line. And this is just right off their website, but this is what the services that they can provide for parents. They can listen, they can be a source of emotional support. They can help you problem solve. So if there's something really specific that you're struggling with, they can help you with forming your own solutions, going back to encouraging you to take care of yourselves, and then actually help working with you and helping you find some of those local resources or local services that could be available to you. And just in general, helping you build on your own strengths to continue to be a great parent. And I just think that's a really wonderful thing. So I would encourage you all to really take a peek at that website. And if you think that this is something that could be helpful to you, then give a call there. They're open Monday through Friday, 12 to 9 in our time zone. So that's everything I wanted to sort of talk about, and this is sort of a summary of the different services or websites and helplines that I mentioned. And then of course, I think I mentioned healthychildren.org every talk I give, but that's the website from the American Academy of Pediatrics that has a lot of really useful information for parents. So I'd encourage you to go there if there's really any topic that you're curious about for your children. And so I'm going to stop sharing and see what questions we have. Looks like there's some in the, oh, where did the chat go? Okay, so any questions? It looks like I thought there might be something in the chat, but that's just everybody's names, which is fine. I'm glad to see you all here. But does anybody have any questions or comments or anything you would like to discuss at this point that I could help with? Looks like we're right on time, so that's good. No questions tonight?
My name is Frankie Dunn, and I enjoyed the training. It helped me realize that I have a granddaughter that's going through some changes right now. She just turned 19, and we were trying to figure out what was wrong with her. And so just this information, and I will get it to her parents in order to try to get her some help, because it's bothering me too. So I'm like going through like depression, worrying,
Yes.
not sleeping, wondering where she's at. So this information will help me out a whole lot. And then I'm going to also share it with parents who share some of their personal problems and things with me. So all of this is very educational, and I will use it to the fullest.
I am so happy to hear that. And I think you are doing the right thing. This goes back to trusting your instincts, right? You have a feeling that there's something wrong with your granddaughter. You need to trust that. And I'm really glad that this information is helpful to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's a question. My view on the COVID vaccine in younger children. So I am a huge proponent of vaccines and of the COVID vaccine. I've actually spent a lot of time helping vaccinate mostly adults at this point, as you know. I am curious to see, I think our children need to be vaccinated for several different reasons. Although we know in general, children do better with COVID than adults. There have been over 300 children who have died this year during the pandemic from COVID, which is more than what we see in a typical year from influenza. There's a lot of children who are struggling with the late effects of COVID. I'm hearing more and more about that. And I also think that the variants are unpredictable. So some of what I've read recently is some of the newer variants seem to be affecting adolescents and young adults more so. So I think it's very important for our children to be vaccinated. My son is 15, and I was so excited when they opened the Pfizer vaccine for 12 and up. I got him the first day I could. I got him there to get his vaccine. But for the younger children, the studies are ongoing. From what I read and hear, it looks like maybe in the fall we'll have something available for the next group of children. So you probably have noticed we sort of start with adults and then work our way backwards to younger and younger children, building on what we've learned before. So I think the next group will be sometime in the fall. How young that goes, I'm not really sure. Of course, I want to see the data before I can give a true informed opinion. I think the data for the 12 and up is very reassuring. I was very comfortable having my child vaccinated. And so I hope that what we see in the studies in the younger children is just as promising and reassuring. I hope it is. I want to feel that I hope I feel as comfortable with, for the younger age group as I feel from what I've seen for the older age group and in adults. Let me see.
Dr. Hartford, you were talking about the COVID vaccine. Are there two of them? Is it the same, is it Pfizer and Moderna that they're using for those, or is there one specifically that they're using more for those children right now?
So right now it's only the Pfizer that's approved for children, but Moderna has submitted. So Pfizer's approved from 12 and up. Moderna and J&J are for 18 and up, but Moderna has already submitted to the FDA to get the emergency use authorization for that 12 to 15 or 12 to 18 age group. So I bet that's going to be coming soon, but all the companies are currently have ongoing studies for like the younger and younger age groups. I think eventually all three will probably have studies and hope to get authorized for all age groups, but that's sort of where we're at.
Hey, Dr. Hartman, this is Melissa. Well, you know, with the studies going on now, they're saying you need a booster for Pfizer and this and that. So I guess that's where a lot of concerns are coming from with some of our parents and different things, you know, because new stuff keeps developing. So is this something that they're going to look at doing annually, like a booster, like the flu vaccine, or?
So I don't think we have an answer to that yet. Sure, the Pfizer company said a booster will be needed, but when I listen to the scientists, I don't think we actually know the answer to that yet. And I think, you know, this is a brand new virus that's only been with us for a year plus. We've only had vaccines for it for several months. So we need to see what happens. But as you know, with many vaccines, it's not uncommon to need boosters. We get a flu shot every year. If you think of many of the childhood vaccinations that we give boosters all throughout childhood. So I don't think it's unreasonable to think that we will need a booster at some point in time. And I do think that what happens with the variants will impact that. And the more that the virus in general circulates, the more chance there is for more variants to arise. And then I think that makes things less predictable. So it's frustrating because we don't know the answer to that. And I think only time will tell. If you think about the fact that for most people who weren't in the studies, vaccination started in December. So that's only like a few months, right? So it's hard to really predict what we're going to have to do that far down the road with something that's so new. That's at least my take on it.
Thank you. I think there's a couple more questions in the chat box now. So.
Let's see. You don't know what else to do. Yeah. That is a really tough age. So we're talking about a 2-year-old who has a great schedule. So I think that's great that you're keeping him on schedule and you get overwhelmed and he throws tantrums. So one thing that can be helpful when as a parent, you're doing all the right things and you're getting your child on that schedule, is getting some help with what we call parent behavior therapy. And that actually can teach someone else to kind of sort of look at things and see the interaction between parent and child and see if they can give any specific suggestions about how you can interact differently with your child to maybe deal with those really challenging times. I would also encourage you to maybe try the parent helpline that I gave at the end, because they might also have some really helpful suggestions for you. But the parent behavior therapy, I think, is can be really helpful when we have a child who, you know, we're just at our wits' end. We've tried everything that we can think of, and we're still struggling. So I would encourage you to I guess the best person to help you with that would be you could try the National Parent Helpline, because they do help connect to resources, but really even just talking with your pediatrician about what resources are available in your area for that type of service. And then the next question was melatonin. So that's a good question. We use melatonin. We can use melatonin in children. It is used. It can be a night. It shouldn't be the final answer. So I think working on a lot of the things we already discussed with the bedtime routines and the so-called sleep hygiene, and there are some other things that I didn't touch on too much, which such as like paying attention to caffeine intake and things like that, and not exercising towards the end of the day, and other things that can interfere with our ability to fall asleep. Melatonin is sometimes used to sort of help when we're working on all those other things. Now, for some children who struggle, it's used for, a lot of times it's used in children who have sort of severe neurodevelopmental problems, such as autism or other things, who really tend to have severe sleep problems that sort of go along with that. Melatonin is often used. So it can be used in children. I would, but again, like I said, I don't think that should be like the final answer, but it can be helpful as we're working on all those other things, so that hopefully it's not needed. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I know we kind of talked about how much sleep an infant, a toddler, and a child needs. Was there anything mentioned about how much sleep as an adult we should be getting?
Well, I think, yeah, I don't think any of us get enough sleep. I always thought it was like 8. I think it's 7 to 8 hours is what I've read. Which I don't know about you, but I feel like as I get busier and busier, that's what gives, is the amount of sleep I give every night.
Absolutely.
And I think, like, I know how awful I feel when I don't get enough sleep. And so, just, it's the same is going to happen for our children. So sometimes I feel like we need to focus on that a little better. I think, like I said before, I don't think our adolescents get enough sleep. But yeah, for adults, I think it's at least 7 hours a night, which I wish I got 7 hours of sleep every night.
Right, well, this is a lot of great information. Again, Dr. Hartford, thank you. You've been very informational.
Good.
I think there's been a lot of stuff that we've all kind of taken note to, especially sometimes the self-care for ourselves. I think a lot of times we get so busy with work, children, other things, that we tend to neglect ourselves a little too much.
I agree with that. I think, we all put our children first, but it's important to remember that we need to take care of ourselves too. It does seem like there's a lot of interest in COVID and the vaccines. So maybe once we have something in the age group of most people's children, I'd be happy to, I don't know, maybe we can talk about whether it would be helpful to come back and talk about that later.
I think that would be a great idea, because I think there'll be a lot of, as there's more information out there, I think there will be a lot more questions, especially that our parents that are kind of on the fence and are not really sure, getting a lot of that information and maybe having it broke down to where we understand, because sometimes we hear some of these terms and we're not exactly sure what they're referring to or what they're exactly talking about.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. It's really frustrating to, like, it's a lot of what ifs and a lot of speculation at this point because it's new, right? But I think just going each step at a time with the information that we have in hand and that we have available, that can be helpful. So yeah, maybe, like I said, from what I'm hearing, that for the next group of children, it may be in the fall that we have something approved if all goes well. But that's, again, a little bit speculation.
Do we have any more questions? All right. Well, I just personally want to say, I know there was one part in the bedtime section that I definitely could relate to, because my son, he has now been converted to the big boy bed, and he is definitely getting up.
Yes, that's a challenge. It is.
So I appreciated those tips, because I will definitely try to use those tonight, because I
Good.
noticed that.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, thank you so much for having me, and hopefully I'll see you all again before too long.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.